I think when I started, like I was just pressing the keyframe button on everything. But then like when I really wanted to start making high-end stuff, then I really had to learn to understand how everything worked together. To this day, I'm very like particular about understanding what the curves are doing.
Welcome to this week's Animators Journey podcast episode. I'm your host, Lucas Ridley, and with me I have Olaf Berman, who is an amazing animation director, an animator who has over 200 projects under his belt, and he has mind-bending animation that has lived rent-free in my mind for over a decade. When I was a student, I remember seeing some of his work, and it blew my mind, and it was the kind of work that all of me and my colleagues passed around, and we're going frame by frame in our animation school. So I'm super excited to have him. He's worked for clients like Burger King, Cartoon Network, Gillette, just to name a few. So he has a lot of insight and experience that I think we can all learn from. Thanks for joining me, Olaf.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you're interested in starting your own animator's journey, check out animatorsjourney.com, where I've created a focused and simplified accelerated approach to becoming a 3D animator. Can you start telling me about how you actually got into animation?
Yeah, it's actually might be a little bit unusual story. So I actually started like very early. I think I was like 12 years old the first time that I animated, and I started with clay, just moving around little bits of clay in front of the camera. So there was some from Sweden, and they had like in some like culture things for kids or something like that. They had set up a little stop motion rink, like with a camera from above and just some where you can move around little pieces of clay. And yeah, I still remember that day when I started to see those little clay bit move on the screen, and it just became a lifelong passion. And yeah, and it went on from there. Like throughout my teenage year, I was doing a lot of like stop motion at home, and later continued to study the subject.
Did you have any formal education in it as you got older, or was this kind of, you were always just experimenting on your own?
I was started like doing it at home as a hobby for a few years. And then when I started high school, I went to the art version of high school where you also get to study some art. And I kind of nagged the teachers to give us an animation course. We got to do films even in high school, still stop motion puppets. And then after that, I started studying directly after high school. I started in university. I studied classical animation, and so stop motion and so 2D animation. Studied that for 2 years, and then I jumped over to 3D and did 3 years of university studies in 3D and art. Was a
Okay.
combination.
And so, at least on LinkedIn, for the last 16 years, you've been a part of Mindbender Studios. Is that an accurate kind of resume for your professional career, or is there
I
kind of
need to
other
update
stuff?
my LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So I became a freelancer actually like a few years back. So I was a creative director at Mindbender for 12 years. And now for the last 4 years or 5 years, something like that, I've been running my own company. I still work with Mindbender on and off, but now it's a little bit different setup than it was.
Okay. And was that your first job out of university? How did you get your foot in the door? Was that with Mindbender, or was that doing freelance stuff?
So I never had an employment in my life. I always started my own companies. When I went to university to learn classical animation, I met a group of people there. While I was studying 3D animation, we started a little company that did stop motion. So I did stop motion and 3D at the same time through that company. So that company was called Mullvad Animation, Swedish name. And it later became Dockhus Animation that still does 2D animation and stop motion today in Sweden. But I only was like part of running the company for a few years. It was even maybe 2 years, something like that. And then I jumped off, and I still worked for them a little bit just as a stop motion animator, even I wasn't running the company. And so the guys who started Mindbender, we were all in the same class in 3D school. So then I started the next company with those guys and worked there for 12 years building that company.
And are they still going, or like you said, you
Yeah,
still
yeah,
work
yeah.
with them a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Um,
Mindbender it's still going. It's just that I'm on a
yeah.
freelancer basis now, so I kind of jump
Okay.
in when it's a project, and I do that with other studios. So I'm not as connected to just Mindbender anymore. So I'm a bit more of
Okay.
I'm a little bit more of a free agent.
What goes into creating a company like that? It seems like a pretty courageous thing to do just out of university, or even while you're still in university. Were you guys making contacts with clients and you just needed a way to structure those projects, or was it a way for you to go pursue that work that you wanted?
Yeah, so it's actually like looking back at it, it's actually very delusional doing stop motion films and studying at the same time. And so yeah, I kind of
Delusional,
had this.
courageous.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Kind of back at it, you're wondering
Yeah.
what you were thinking, but yeah, everything kind of worked out.
Yeah.
But yeah, kind of, we wanted to do our own things and be able to apply for money from like the Swedish Film Institute. And I also
Mm.
had built up a little bit of contact since I've been doing like animation for such a long time in a pretty young age. There was already people that were aware of me. So we very early had a few opportunities coming in,
Mm.
especially through the stop motion company. And then, but actually when we started Mindbender, it was just because we never planned to start that company really. It was more like some of the guys were working on like the film for the graduation project, and it was way too ambitious. It was like a 15-minute, like high-end 3D film. And of course, it didn't finish in time. So the team got back together after school, and those were my friends. And I were not working like full time with the other company anymore. So I jumped in and helped them with their student project. And at one point, we just like all of us went broke. So we had to start looking for commercial gigs. Like, so it started like on a very small scale, just like local stuff, like it was like the local gym and someone
Yeah.
that we knew needed some animation, and we did them that we could do it. And so that was kind of, yeah, it was a very like naive way to start a company, but yeah, it worked
Well, I
out
think,
somehow.
yeah, yeah, it sounds like it did, and you guys generated like through the years enough work. I don't think it's inaccurate to say internationally recognized because I'm in Vancouver Film School at the time, and I'm seeing these Cartoon Network bumpers, the
Yeah.
duplicator stuff that you guys did, and it just blew our mind, especially for 3D. And it makes sense with your history talking about starting with claymation, seeing the work that you did in 3D. Like it looks like you approach 3D with just this boundaryless approach where because we were like, wait a minute, you can't do that in 3D. And then you're doing that and we're like, oh my gosh, that's possible. Like we didn't even know that was possible to do in 3D. Seeing the stuff you guys were doing. Did that kind of how I feel like again, courageous comes to mind when I'm like, I wouldn't even attempt to do what you guys did with those rigs and the animation. It wouldn't even cross my mind because I feel like with 3D animation, you learn the structure and you have to have joints and you do this and you do that. And it gets hard, I think, to get out of our own minds and think creatively. And seeing your all's work, it just seems like you had that just incredible approach to the animation. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about, like especially for those projects?
Yeah, it's kind of fusion between different people and different specialities. And so we had Michael, who was the CEO, and the person who was really good with rendering and making like photo stuff. And then we had that's really good with animation. And so he was a big animation part of the company for many years. And then it was me, who was more the creative vision. And it's all our three like ideas, styles blended together. Like mine, very like 2D-ish. My ideas were very much into 2D animation and like really cartoony stuff. And then we had Michael, who could like create these amazing photorealistic things, and just like our styles like merging together with Callis animation supervision. That's just like level also. It built this fine. And for me, it was really like I had started like experimenting more and more with those animation styles where I made quite, yeah, where I kind of wanted to start pushing the animation into things I had not seen before and that I had not done before. I would love to experiment with animation and just see where I can take it, create things that, yeah, create new things with it. And I think when that's blended together with the photorealism and, yeah, with that technical side of it, it was this fusion that kind of happened. And then also with the Cartoon Network bumpers that you mentioned. So that is a little bit further into the company. Here we had started to create a structure and made things start to work as a company, as opposed to at the beginning when it was very like chaotic. And yeah, and also we got in contact with Cartoon Network through some earlier films we did. That was also got a lot of attention on the internet and went around the industry quite a bit. And so we got in contact with Cartoon Network, and I think at first they contacted us and said, do you guys want to pitch for a TV series or something like that? And we were like, we wanted to make something like smaller and more high end. So we instead said, no, but we want to make the bumpers. So it was one of those rare cases where the client just accepted what we wanted to make, and where we could take the idea all the way from the first idea and all the way through the pre-production and the production and do the whole thing without needing to compromise or have someone above us to tell us what to do. So it was a
It's
perfect storm
amazing.
of many things in that stage.
Yeah. How many did you all end up doing? Do
For
you
Cartoon
remember?
Network,
There was like, yeah, I guess, and because there was like the pirate one, there was other ones. Yeah.
I think we did, was it five perhaps, of the ones that call the Duplicator
Yeah.
series with the little
Yeah.
red dudes that duplicate?
Yeah.
all sorts of funny stuff. So we did that first, and then we went over and did the pirate short for Cartoon Network. So I guess we ended up doing six of
So,
those.
yeah,
Yeah,
those were amazing. If I was Cartoon Network, I'd be like, okay, now let's make a series of that.
yeah, yeah,
Those were so cool.
yeah.
What you guys didn't want to go into series because you knew the quality would be compromised just because the scope of the work would be so much bigger?
Yeah. We also didn't have the team for it, and it's another game with TV series in general. I'm not sure if it's different these days. This was like 2009 or something like that.
Yeah,
2000, oh what?
10
Yeah,
maybe.
2010, 11 maybe is more accurate. Like TV series today, it's changed quite a bit. At that time, it was like you have to pump out a lot of content for a pretty small budget, and it was just not what we wanted to do. I think all of us wanted to go more into high-end animation and kind of be able to spend a long time on one film, develop in that way.
Yeah. Has and that was that always the focus from the genesis of the companies that you've started? Was there an end goal in mind of this is the kind of work we want to get? Was it always focused to commercials, or was there like you had a secret script in your back pocket you wanted to, what was always, and has that changed to where you are now?
Yeah, no, there was definitely a secret script in the back pocket that I worked on for probably a decade or so, for like in between commercial project. And like the end goal was going into feature film at that time, at least. I think my goals have shifted a bit, but yeah, it was, we were always like wanting to do our own projects, but then I think we got a little bit caught up in doing commercial projects, especially since the company started growing and the team became bigger and bigger. We always had to keep that money coming in. So we always had to have a bunch of commercial projects in. And after a while, it was harder and harder for me also to focus on the creative, since there was always a company to run and a commercial
Mm,
project to make sure it was functioning as it was supposed to. So it was a
yeah.
little bit hard after a while to balance those both sides. We were also like all three of us, like me, Chandler, and Michael, who ran it for the longest period of time, where we were also all from a creative background. Like none of us were really, at least at that stage, like we didn't come from a company background. So it was a lot of a learning curve in that direction also, to learn how to make a growing, functioning company.
How did, yeah, from that side of things, you mentioned you went through like the art version of high school, and from a business side and the friends that you have, the colleagues who came from the 3D school, how did the business acumen come into play with running the company? Did you guys have like an advisor in that capacity, or hiring an accountant kept you honest on what are we doing here to keep this place open, or like how did the business side come into play? Because I know a lot of people who start a journey have dreams of starting their own studio, or I have especially younger students think one day I'm going to make my own video game, or I'm going to make my own company. Can you talk about some of the realities of actually operating a company aside from the creative?
Yeah, sure. So like my role was creative director, and then Michael was more the CEO. It did fall a little bit more on other people. And since I was a co-owner, of course, I had to learn some stuff also. And I think like for us, like at that stage, we were a little bit too naive with the company stuff. I think like we could have much earlier, yeah, maybe take in someone or more like business oriented people, maybe in an earlier stage. And of course, we have the accountants and stuff like that. I don't think you can really get away from that. Yeah, it's just a learning curve, like everything else. Like the more you do it, the more you learn. But then you can, of course, try to not step on too many landmines on the way and learn. But still, there's still a lot of, if you're an animator and want to start a company, like that's going to be its own learning curve in itself. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's important to think about.
One of the companies I worked for, they were very generous in their weekly meetings and basically discussed the accounting with us
Yeah.
and how much runway they needed. And I appreciated it from organizationally because it gave everyone a clue into we're all a team here to make this thing work, and really what it requires to make this thing work for the long term. There's so many
Mm.
moving pieces, and they have to be working like months and months in advance to make sure they have enough money for payroll, and how that can affect the budgets of scheduling if things get pushed or the client changes their mind. And there's just so much involved with it. I had one YouTube video where I try to describe, because I get this question a lot, like, I'm going to start my own studio. I'm like, okay, you've never worked in the industry and you're like just learning animation and you haven't been to business school. There's all these things. I'm like gently trying to open their eyes a little bit to like I've been working in the industry for 10 years and I would hesitate to try to start my own company
Yeah.
because I just it's so much it'd be so much of stuff that I don't think I want to be doing. I want to be animating as opposed to managing people. So that's I think that was one thing. I don't know if that's accurate. Like that I was trying to gently open people's eyes. You love 3D modeling? Cool. Don't open a studio because you won't be 3D modeling. You will be managing other people
Yeah.
doing the work you want to be doing.
Yeah.
So my advice for people who, if they're listening, who do still want to do that is at least go get work in the industry first before you try to
Yeah.
open your own studio. I don't know if that's something, looking back, if you
Yeah.
would recommend the same thing.
Yeah, I think definitely we would have a benefit from that. More people that has actually seen those company structures a bit more. And yeah,
Yeah,
I should also, like now I'm talking about the early days. I know that Mindbender is like very different like entity today, how it works. And
sure.
yeah, this was just us like figuring it out in the many years ago.
Early days. Yeah,
Yeah, I think there's a very big difference also between different company forms. For me, like I came to the realization after a while that it's just not for me to have an animation studio that has that because like we had like more and more employees all the time. And it was this never ending need of like always having projects in and always like supervising something. While after I started working more as a free agent or freelancer, I still have a company, but I'm the only one in the company. And then like when there's a project, I have my network of artists all around the world that I worked with before. And when a project comes in, then we pull together the team and everyone works on that project and then everyone dissolves again. So it's like a team kind of working the same way that I do. And we have that connection. And so then in between projects, I can just sit and work on my own personal stuff and I don't have to worry about paying anyone or,
yeah,
yeah. So it's a completely different company structure. So I think that can be something to consider what sort of company you want. Yeah. In my experience,
yeah.
it can be quite heavy with that, like a team that constantly on the payroll.
Yeah, that's a lot of responsibility and yeah,
Yeah.
managing that. And I guess is that the answer to you alluded to earlier, like that your goals have changed over the years and priorities to what you just currently described. So you have a bit more freedom. Was that kind of the shift for you now in your current situation?
But yeah, for sure. Like right now, so I might do one commercial project and then from that commercial project, I can have quite a few months of financial stability to kind of work on whatever I want to. So yeah, I have a lot of like little personal projects in the making, short films and children's books and just like cool animations I want to do. Like that freedom is worth a lot to me. That
Yeah.
was much harder to have before.
That's cool. I love to see the evolution of careers over time and how like goals shift and how what you thought you wanted it changes and going through that process that the value of your time, like what you're describing, is increases when you realize, oh, I don't have time to work on these things. And so I think it's helpful for people who are just starting out so they can gain knowledge from this and kind of future project their own path and see, oh, okay, that makes sense how you went from this to that to this based on those experiences. And so I love
Yeah.
hearing stories like yours that because I feel like I'm in a similar state where I want the experience of the places I'm working at now. But I still feel like what you're just, that secret script in your back pocket. It's like, all right, it's been in that pocket for like years and years now, and I haven't made any progress. And then you future project, if I keep doing what I'm doing now, it's going to be the same 5 years from now. So something
Yeah.
has to start changing if I want to make progress. And do you still have that secret script that you're working on or other projects like that? Is that like kind of like the children's book kind of a thing? And what kind of stuff
Yeah,
are you
yeah,
working
that's
in
a
your
couple of those. Yeah, yeah. So I have a 12-minute long short film. Like that's one of the that I was working on during all those 3 years. Yeah, we'll see if it happens. So it feels like when you wrote a script like 12 years ago, it's starting to feel like a little bit aged. But yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
funny. Like what you said with it's kind of easy to get stuck in a rut. So for me also, like during all those years, it's like I'm making those commercial projects in order to do like my passion projects one day, like build up the team and the finances. But then you're like 200 anime commercials later, and I'm still like thinking the same thing. So at one point, you just gotta switch your mindset and like stop
Yeah.
doing something you don't want to do in order to do something that you want to do and just go for directly for what you actually want to do. Even it can be hard to
Yeah.
see that path there. You kind of have to break that pattern or idea of how you thought you would get there and find another way to it. Get to be
Yeah.
on the
I feel like
lookout
it's
for do that shit.
I hope to see this 12-minute short one day, first off.
Yeah, yeah,
And I love to see that shift in people's careers where they have time, they're giving themselves space to do that stuff, because I love to see them having the space and energy and ability to do that. And I think that's what's so amazing with social media these days and YouTube. It's starting to allow creators, if they can gain enough following, that they have that kind of financial freedom to a degree, and they create an audience that wants that content that they naturally want to make. I noticed you've been on Instagram. That's how we connected. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
no way. Because I think I emailed Mindbender Studios like way back in the day, like, how did you make the
Oh, yeah.
rig with the mouth that goes into 2D
Wow.
shape, but it's also forward facing? I don't think we ever got a response, but like in class, we were like, we got to figure this out. So you're sharing these amazing things on Instagram. Are you trying to like incorporate Instagram and, I don't know, strategy moving forward to try to help support that kind of creative work that you want to do in your free time?
Yeah, yeah. Right now, I'm focusing quite a bit on posting regularly. So I've been like pretty terrible with social media, and also since I had my brand was very connected with Mindbender for such a long time, like everything we put up out were like through Mindbender. So now I feel that I need to build up my own social media. So I'm trying to post like yeah, almost every day something just from a project and kind of break it down into if it's like an animation. That's I just put it like together with animation and then a step version under just so you can see the movement without having to step through it yourself. Or yeah, other types of, I'll go into a little bit more of other types behind the scenes, show some animatics, some mockings, or work in progress on. But yeah, that's what I'm working on. It goes together a little bit with me wanting also to not be too like back in the commercial industry. Like I still make commercials now and then, but it's like everything you do as your own project, you kind of need that following also and that social media presence. So it's quite yeah. I feel that it's quite important to build that. So that's one of the things that I'm working on right now to be not to be too lazy with the social media.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're crushing it from everything I can tell. This is what you're posting, exactly what we did in school, where the
Yeah.
lower half is the slow motion, because we're like, what's happening here? It's so like the overshoots and stuff, and like how all the settles. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that style, or like how you approach animation in general. Do you have a shorthand for these types of principles of animation? Because the style of animation is, I feel like, very specific and has these very specific overshoots and settles that gives things this like almost a stop motion claymation feel, where you feel like it's a volume that's actually deforming and not just like a rig that's mechanical.
Yeah.
How do you approach animation and polishing it to that level?
So it's very much, I work a lot with the animatics. That's where the whole foundation for that style comes from. Like figuring out what would be like a cool 2D animation and then recreate it in 3D. So it's very important to, before we start to animate, it's really important to know what the character has to do. And so it always starts with a 2D animatic, and then we can send it off to the riggers so that they can incorporate what we need to do for that specific animation. And then it goes into animation. And then it's all about doing it like frame by frame. It's not really, it's all about what works from the camera. So there's a lot of, like you talked about, like the 2D mouth on the character, like that pose would not work from any other angle. Like you can only, it's like, we try to do as much as possible that would really only work from one camera angle to get that 2D feel of it. And then it's a lot of like the motions in between the poses. That's usually where we go like really crazy. What can we do here to really like to smudge this arm all over the screen? Or how can we like add a few extra eyes here when the character kind of spins around, or just do like weird stuff. If a character like holds something in left hand, then he like does a pose shift, and they like when the pose is over, it's in his right hand, but you didn't really see it. It was all like in the movement. Yeah.
I love
Just
that
try
stuff.
to, yeah, just to do like weird stuff. And that's also why I'm posting like frame by frame stuff, because that's really where my passion is like just manipulating those frames and doing like weird stuff. But you don't really see it unless you
Yeah.
just feel that it
It feels like
feels
a
a bit
magic
weird.
trick. You're like, what just happened? And it looks so
Yeah, yeah,
good, but
exactly,
I couldn't
exactly.
explain it.
No, that's what I kind of love to do. Like just do that weird thing, but it looks completely right in the movement, but it's like something weird
Yeah.
happening. Yeah. And yeah, I just like, I think for me, it's just like a fascination like that. But I think it comes from planning a lot and knowing what sort
Mm.
of animation you want to try out.
In your planning, I mean, you referred to 2D kind of starting like conceptually starting with 2D. Are you actually starting with physical 2D? Are you doing tests in 2D first before you even go into rigging kind of a thing? Or how
Yeah,
do you
yeah,
discover? Yeah.
we do very detailed 2D animatics.
Okay.
Yeah, I think for me, if I'm to do a really weird animation, then it always starts with pen and paper and just like figuring out, okay, this. So yeah, I just did one animation, for example, with an experimental walk cycle where a character is turned upside down and then he has like ears and his ears becomes his legs and his legs becomes his ears. And then like he continues to walk and everything looped all over again. And it's just a super
Mm.
tricky things I have to. It's also why I have this pen with all the different colors because I can like, so one leg gets one color and like the ear gets another color and then I can keep track on what's
Can
gonna go
track
where.
it.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not like very much
I'd love to see
sketch.
those. If you post those on Instagram, I'd love to see those. Like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
2D,
that's
even pre-production stuff. That'd be cool.
yeah, yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's the next thing that I'm planning to start posting all the 2D stuff and all the making of.
that'd be
So,
amazing.
but yeah, then I go
Yeah.
into 2D animation and do like pretty detailed. Like, yeah, it's also yeah, it depends. Like on in some cases we even do you go down to like 12 frames per second, even in a 2D animatic to really
Wow.
understand what's going on and can be very detailed like that.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have that up as reference? Do you bring that inside Maya, like as an image plane or something, or how? Are you just because you're taking it so far? I'm assuming are you almost like rotoscoping it in 3D, or how does that actually work when you switch gears into 3D?
So it depends a bit like who is animating. I know a lot
Mhm.
of, if I know that I'm doing the animatic for another animator, then I'm gonna be like even more specific probably than if I do it myself. If I am to do it myself, like I'm not gonna be like once I know what movement I'm gonna do, I'm probably not gonna take it in as an image plane or anything like that. But I know a lot of animators do that. It's voluntary, like up to the animator. Maybe if one animator is not quite getting it right, then maybe we'll ask them to take it in as an image plane and kind of a bit more. But yeah, definitely both. A little bit like when I go into 3D, I let it go a little bit and kind of experiment a lot more. But
Mm.
yeah, if I am to give it to another animator, then I want to like have thought it through a little bit more in the animatic phase. Kind of depends
Yeah.
a little.
What part of that stage do you like the best? If you only could do one thing, which would you
Oh, that. Do you mean
like? The
like
concept,
pre-production or
the
actual
yeah,
animation?
or like yeah, or animating it. Which part are you? I don't want to hand this part off. I want to do this part. Or are you
Yeah.
doing what you want to do because you're doing the creative side, or how?
Yeah, I think like it goes together so much. The 2D animatics and the directing is the same thing for me. Like it's the way I direct. That's
Yeah.
just how I get my mind into something that's understandable for someone else. So I think like it would be very hard for me to direct without doing 2D animatics in a way. But so I guess, yeah, I'm more and more gearing towards directing. But yeah, I love animation also. But if I had to choose, I guess I would stay a little bit more in like the 2D animatic preparation stage because that's how I feel that I can like I love animation, but I can only do so much. But when I do pre-production and 2D animatics and kind of supervise, it's like you can do so much bigger projects and get so much more out there in that way.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm what because I've done similar to what you're describing just out of necessity, where it's if I can get a freelance commercial project, okay, friends I went to school with or whatever, whoever it is, or sometimes even a student who's maybe further along
Yeah,
and trying to build this kind of ad hoc team. And then I have to choose what do I want to do? What can I hand off? And it's yeah. And then I start to question like, wait, why am I doing this at all? Because I'm not doing the things that I want to be doing. I'm
yeah,
having to like manage the people who are doing the stuff that I want to do. But is there any project that stands out that's I know I have like my favorites of the stuff you've done, but what are there some that are your favorites and the reasons why?
yeah. I guess we talked a little bit about the Cartoon Network projects. Those were a perfect storm on many
Yeah.
things. But yeah, there's also, yeah, I think we talked about most of the short film that I was working on. It's actually, so maybe you've seen the one with the little pink cat, like that goes
Yeah.
after fish. So that's actually
Yeah, what's it called? If someone wanted to
Thief. Is that,
food thief. Yeah.
yeah, so that cat and that environment is actually like a character and environment from the 12-minute script.
Oh,
And
cool.
that we decided, okay, we want to do a little case study for this short film. So we made the character and the set, and then we just came up with a 1-minute story to test out the rig. And it was just like a proof of concept with 3D scanning environments and making a really crazy rig. So that little project is actually a case study for the short film. So those two are kind of connected in many ways.
Okay. Is there any time when you're doing these discovery phases where you're like, this doesn't work? I feel like the stuff that I've seen and you've described is like, I feel like everything you guys have done, because the vision you had seemed pretty clear that it always ended up working. Was there ever a time where it didn't work out?
There's been like many, especially commercial projects, where what usually happens is that I want to push something really cool and I have a vision in my head, but then to get that through all the agencies and client, the legal departments and stuff like that can be a very different story. So it's quite often that you end up with this really cool vision and we like done a pitch and presented something, but then as it goes along, we realize that we can't really make it
Make it,
to, yeah, there's been a lot of projects like that where we have to abandon really cool ideas to get it through like the bureaucratic systems of
yeah.
commercial making, I guess. So that's
I
usually
did.
what happens.
Yeah. There was one project, I think any alcohol related commercials have, at least in the United States, especially, I didn't realize as I worked on one, it was like, it was pinatas that were having a party for this like Cinco de Mayo type of themed beer.
Yeah.
And everything was approved, storyboard, everything. And there was like a kiddie pool in the background that
Mm.
the pinatas were going to hang out in. And then I filmed it and it was puppeteered. And then the lawyers got involved and were like, you can't have water
Uh,
around beer or something like that. I was like,
yeah.
I
Yeah.
had to remove this thing. And then it's just something you don't even think of. When the legal department gets involved, you're like, oh my
Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
I got to figure out how to remove this thing. I can't reshoot all this stuff.
The legal department is usually like they come up with the legal departments and lawyers. It's always a comment that you can never imagine is going to come. And
Yeah.
it always comes late in the production.
Yeah.
It's so far out on your reality that you think about those details. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but I had like very similar experience to your water cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very hard
Yeah.
to know what the legal
Anticipate.
day. Yeah.
If you had to teach animation, or if I could twist your arm and I could get you to teach for Animator's Journey,
Yep.
what would be the kinds of things that, like when you're supervising, that you try to impart on to your team, or that you maybe see people struggle with, that you find yourself coming back, revisiting to try to get people to quality wise or process wise, or other concepts like that you could share?
I have to think a little bit. I guess it's I think like the way I work, like I would probably like teach if it were more that animation style, I would definitely say to start early in the like planning stage and go from pen and paper to doing it as a 2D animatic or to really study that. And then I guess like it's really good to kind of just read up on like the animation principles and all that stuff and getting good feedback from people, but then it's all about pushing the time in. I think that's what always makes a really good animators. It's really how much time they spend on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a lot of things. So for me, it's also coming
It's a
from
big
stop
question.
motion.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, it's kind of a big question, but yeah, it's a good thank you. For me, it's also since I came from stop motion, like learning the graph editor, and I'm actually like I really want to understand what the curves are doing, and I try to always keep quite clean curves because otherwise I paint myself into a corner where I haven't and there's something wrong but I can't understand it. So for me it's I keep a very close eye on the graph editor and understand what each curve is doing so that I can see in the curves what's wrong. I think also just doing this experiments with the graph editor where you really understand what you're doing and understand how the curves interact with each other. That's really important for me at least to keep to not start making that too messy.
Yeah. No, you're not like counter keying
Starting the
stuff.
animation.
And
Yeah. I think like my first when I started, like I was just pressing the keyframe button on everything. But then, like when I really wanted to start making high end stuff, then I really had to learn to understand how everything worked together. And I think to this day, I'm very like particular about understanding what the curves are doing and how they're interacting in
for,
order to reach those higher levels of it and keep it really smooth on.
and to that point, kind of more on the technical level, for that reason, are you keeping stuff in a world space as opposed to a local, so you're not having to counter animate stuff? Or do you have temporary constraints that you can bring stuff into world space so you can, because I'm just thinking from a graph editor standpoint, to see a clean curve of actually what's happening in the world versus what it's doing
Mm.
relative to the rig. Are you swapping spaces ever, or how does that work for you?
It's always a little bit different, but in general, it's always in gimbal mode animation. And then it's just like also in the rigs to make sure that you have I always want like extra controls above the controls, especially the ones that always ends up in gimbal, like the arms and stuff like that. Yeah, you always end up in gimbal with also then I always want like an extra or two like extra controls above that I could, or below like one that's fresh that I can start to animate when the other one is and it's also so much about the planning with everything. Like, so before I even start to animate, I always like, when I start to figure out what's going to happen in the animation, I always go in and see where there's going to be gimbal problems. And it's really important to make sure that the rotation order on that joint is correct when I start the scene. Because if like a character, if the rotation order is set up the wrong way, you're just going to have gimbal problems throughout the whole scene. Well, if you just change that or key that, when it starts, then you gotta have like immediately a really good setup for the scene. So yeah, that's something that you really don't. That's also like when if you just go too deep into like detailed blocking, for example, that's the kind of stuff that you don't see until you hit the spline button, and then you have all these like gimbal problems and shit, and you have to just start reanimating the whole thing. So
Yeah.
I really need to, yeah, I'm really speaking for myself. Like I really have to like figure that stuff out early and really understand the curves, where all my like rotation orders, how they are, if there's something
No, I
that's
love
gonna
that. Yeah.
cause me problems later on.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to from our conversation. What I'm gathering is like how important planning is to you in your process, especially coming from such an early 2D background, and then that carries through 3D because I know how to approach this, and then having the technical side of knowing I want the rotation order a certain way, and it's like kind of the theme is like planning, and you're like setting yourself up for success all along the way. I think it's a great thing for newer animation students to keep in mind that that kind of stuff isn't something you learn and then throw away. I feel like
Mm,
when animation students start, they're like, they don't know the significance of things that they're learning. And they think that it's just because they're learning it at a beginner or intermediate level, that it's
mm.
only for those stages of their career and not something that they should keep doing
Yeah,
or
yeah,
do more of as they go. So I think it's great to
yeah.
hear from your experience and how important that is to your process, no matter where you're at.
Yeah, I think it all goes
That's
back to
good.
that, like the really simple stuff. To Because like you're gonna get back with stuff like if you don't have what you need in the rig, or run into problems later on with the curves that you haven't. Yeah, it's all about planning for sure. Agree.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want to be sensitive to your time. We're coming up on an hour. Is there anything else that you would impart for the audience of Animators Journey, who are typically people who are working a 9 to 5 and they're trying to think about switching careers into animation? Is there any advice that you would give that kind of person who is how do I learn animation, or how do I get my foot in the door? What would you impart to them? You've mentioned it a little bit, maybe learning the principles and that kind of a thing. Is there anything else you would want to advice to give them?
Yeah, I think 90% of it is finding the time to do it. And yeah, in whatever way needed. Yeah, like I said, there's like great resources.
But yeah, so yeah, for those people, it's finding the time. And I think especially for people who are trying to switch careers, that's the toughest thing to do because the animation is so time consuming. And if you have a life, and typically people who are trying to switch careers already maybe have a partner or a family, and it's like, where do
Yeah.
you find the time for something so time consuming? Yeah, that's
Yeah. I also think like a really important, maybe the most important thing of all is to find something that you really love to do. And I think that's what's going to make you really good at it when it's something that, yeah. So there's so many different ways to do it. Like for me, for example, it was never really in the beginning about becoming good at animation. It was more about like world building. Yeah, just creating characters and stuff like that. Maybe for one person, it's more that way to learn, and for another person, it's much more about learning the technicalities of animation and going into all that stuff. And yeah, and then there's all sorts of different animations. Like you can learn to 2D animate and then transition, like yeah, I think, or stop motion or whatever way it is, whatever it is that you can't stop doing, that's like thing you love to do, you're gonna get good at. That's my experience at
yeah,
least. Become, I cannot become good at anything if I don't love to do it. I think like finding that right match. But yeah, then it's also,
yeah,
of course, like all the stuff. It's great to read up on animation principles or do like online courses or finding mentors and all that stuff. Or even, yeah, even like people like at the same level as you to go back and forward and get feedback. I think like all those things are like very valuable, but yeah, the most important thing is to just find the time and push in the hours.
yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat. And people can find you on Instagram at Olaf Berman. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm posting a lot on Instagram right now, and I have my homepage, olafberman.com. It's OLOV Berman on both of those.
Excellent. Thanks so much for the time. And this has been super educational for me. And I'm so glad we got to talk.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very happy to be on the podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's Animators Journey podcast episode. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you get notified of all future podcast episodes. Check out the whole library of episodes we've done so far if you are just now finding us. And I look forward to seeing you hopefully at animatorsjourney.com so I can help you along your own journey to becoming a 3D animator. Thanks for listening.